Welcome to From Cure to Care. My name is Michael Connolly. I'm Joint Associate Professor of Clinical Nursing at University College Dublin School of Nursing, Midwifery and Health Systems and Our Lady's Hospice and Care Services. This module focuses on spiritual nursing care interventions for end-of-life care during the COVID-19 pandemic. In this session, we'll be focusing on understanding the concept of compassion. To understand the concept of compassion, we will focus on a number of key questions. What do we mean by compassion? Why is it important? Can we learn compassion? And how do we cultivate a truly compassionate response from those who care? If we ask the question, what is compassion? A simple definition, we'd find that it's the sympathetic pity and concern for the sufferings or misfortunes of others. A more deeper definition considers compassion to literally mean to suffer together. It's defined as the feeling that arises when we are confronted with another's suffering and we feel motivated to relieve that suffering. I'd like to introduce you to Dame Cicely Saunders. Identified as the founder of the modern hospice movement, she founded St. Christopher's Hospice in London in 1967. Throughout her life and her life's work, it's quite clear that for Cicely, compassion was living the life of providing care to those who were suffering, in particular those who were suffering from life-limiting conditions that were likely to be the cause of their death. This is one of her most famous quotes. You matter because you are you, and you matter to the last day of your life. And we will do everything we can to help you die peacefully and to live until you die. And that's a concept that's quietly at work all through what we do in palliative and end-of-life care. It was also quite clear that this expression of compassion was very much prevalent during the time, the very early stages of COVID-19, when so many people died of that disease, where those who were afflicted with COVID-19 and were being cared for in hospitals, in wards and in intensive care units were being cared for with compassion by those who saw their suffering because of this dreadful disease, which at the early stages we knew very little about. But yet nurses, doctors, and other healthcare professionals went about their business, caring, linking in and identifying the suffering of others and trying to do their best either to return to health or indeed to care for somebody until they had actually died. In her work, Cicely Saunders talked about the real presence of another person is a place of security. And that security is what enables us to provide compassionate care, recognizing the suffering in others. However, in order to be compassionate, we must be committed. We must demonstrate that commitment to providing that care. In order to provide that care, we must have confidence in what we're doing, and confidence to be committed to what we are doing. What better way to show that is through communication, recognizing that we need to work with and for others and communicate what we're doing clearly and with confidence to demonstrate our commitment to compassion. And in all things we do in healthcare, it is done collaboratively. As a team, we work best together. Through history and from varying traditions, we see archetypes of compassion, be it the Good Samaritan, drawn from the Christian tradition, or the Bodhisattvas from the Buddhist tradition. These individuals, not otherworldly gods, but rather the qualities that exuded a shining example of the human response. And today we see evidence of compassion in those willing to recognize the suffering of others and help to relieve it in some way, shape or form. We particularly see that in healthcare, and even more particularly we've seen it and exemplified through the response of healthcare professionals to those who are diagnosed with COVID, and indeed those who are dying from COVID. Why is compassion important? I'd like to draw your attention to this short piece by John Halifax. The reference is found on the last slide. And in this short piece, John talks about the importance of compassion in healthcare, particularly at the end of life. But she also talks importantly about the challenges that we might face in providing compassionate care. The challenges to us as carers in our ability to sustain that compassionate care and how to avoid burnout, as she calls it. A key consideration for us as compassionate carers is to recognize that compassion starts with ourselves. If we do not include ourselves in our compassion, then that compassion that we try to share to others is incomplete. To be compassionate to others, we must first of all be compassionate to ourselves. And that really speaks to the need, particularly for self-care for us as health care providers. Quite often we read and hear about the importance of intuition. And what I would suggest is that it's about, for us as healthcare providers, listening to the still small voice inside. It's important that we listen to that voice inside that may be telling us we need to be mindful of ourselves and to care more for ourselves, or we need to be mindful of those we are caring for. The image in front of you is a representation of the mythical goddess of nature from Ireland, Eru. This sculpture is made of leaves that have fallen from the trees that have been bronzed. And what you see is Eru, as the goddess of nature, kneeling, her ear to the ground, listening for the voice of nature rebirthing in the spring. And quite often we forget the needs that we have to listen to that voice inside that is guiding us and telling us to be mindful of ourselves or to be mindfully compassionate of others. There's a wonderful saying in Irish culture, in the Irish language, we live in the shadow of each other. And each of us as human beings has lived in each other's shadow over this COVID period, this last 2.5 years. We as healthcare providers, as nurses and other healthcare professionals, have lived in the shadow of others that we have cared for. And those who have lived with and died from COVID have also lived in the shadow of others. So it is important that we recognize that in our lives we touch others whether we recognize that or not. And how we make people feel through our compassionate care, particularly in this terrible time of COVID, is really, really important to be mindful of. On the screen in front of you is a poem written by Father Ned Crosby, a Catholic priest of the Diocese of Galway here in Ireland. He writes mostly in the Irish language, and this was translated by my colleague, Professor Philip Larkin. And it speaks to us about a palliative care nurse working in the community, and speaks about her, and also about her patient and the patient's family. And for me, it idealizes the compassion that we see every day in palliative care, and particularly at end of life. After the months in bed, those Sundays to Fridays waiting for the morphine, after the days and weeks of the kept up face for her sisters and brother, after the last words to her daughter and son, nurse came to lay her out. At the loneliest moment, she sings a fragile lullaby, each note a petal of comfort. She was then mother of the world, rocking her baby to sleep after the pain that was prayer. This outpouring by this nurse, showing absolutely the compassion towards this person who needed morphine for pain, who was brave facing it for her family, and now was being laid out. Her mortal remains tended to compassionately by the nurse. To find compassion within ourselves, we need to look beneath the surface. We need to recognize that there is a depth to us in our humanity. By looking to that depth and listening to that voice inside, we become more sustained in what we do. And it is important that we recognize that we are nourished by the wisdom of our own compassion, our compassion for ourselves that then extends into compassion for others. I leave you with the words of Henri Nouwen, a Christian philosopher and theologian. It's important that we remember that we are the difference we make. You are the difference you make.